In the hallowed halls of the Republican National Convention, a common refrain echoed through the speeches of prominent political figures like Virginia Governor Glenn Youngkin, Florida Senator Rick Scott, and South Carolina Senator Tim Scott. They laid the blame for the silent thief of inflation squarely at the feet of the Biden administration, promising to end inflation and make America affordable again. However, as economists and investors scrutinize the Republican economic platform, they find a potential paradox. The very policies championed by the Republicans, including tax cuts, tariff hikes, and a crackdown on immigration, could actually stoke the inflationary fires they seek to extinguish. As the Federal Reserve gears up for monetary easing, the looming shift in policy under a potential Republican administration raises concerns about sustained interest rate cuts in 2025. Julia Coronado, a former Fed economist and founder of Macro Policy Perspectives LLC, warns that the stated Republican policies could bring, at minimum, a significant burst of inflation. This sentiment is echoed in the Treasury market, where investors have dubbed bets on higher yields on longer-dated securities as the Trump trade, reflecting their expectations of heightened inflation. Of course, the ability of a potential Trump administration to implement its proposed policies hinges on the composition of Congress. Moreover, some of Trump's policy ideas remain vague declarations, subject to change if he's elected, especially if financial markets push back. As Coronado notes, what will a Trump administration do when faced with real trade-offs? That's a real source of uncertainty. Let's delve into the potential inflationary impacts of the key pillars of the Republican economic platform. Tax cuts. The deficit dilemma. Trump's promise to cut taxes, including extending the 2017 cuts set to expire in 2025 and further reducing the corporate rate to 15%, could widen the fiscal deficit. When the government spends more than it collects, it effectively injects money into the economy, adding to inflationary pressures. While Republicans have pledged to rein in spending, history suggests that sweeping spending restrictions are unlikely when the GOP controls both the White House and Congress. The Nonpartisan Committee for a Responsible Federal Budget estimates that eliminating taxes on tips alone could add up to $250 billion to the deficit over a decade. Jeffrey Sherman, Deputy Chief Investment Officer at DoubleLine Capital, warns that tax cuts don't pay for themselves and that the worst outcome for markets is a Republican sweep of both the White House and Congress. Tariff hikes. The cost of protectionism. Higher tariffs, unless absorbed by sellers, importers, and retailers, will ultimately be passed on to consumers in the form of higher prices. Trump has wholeheartedly endorsed tariffs as a policy measure, calling them phenomenal economically. The GOP platform calls for a baseline tariff, with the Trump campaign previously floating the idea of a 10% universal rate and a staggering 60% levy on all goods from China. Mark Zandi, chief economist at Moody's Analytics, likens such tariff policies to stagflation, noting that economists hate tariffs because they hurt inflation and growth at the same time. A study by the Peterson Institute for International Economics estimates that a 60% tax on Chinese imports would cost the average middle-income family $1,700 annually. Immigration curbs. Labor market disruptions. The historic influx of immigrants in recent years has significantly expanded the U.S. labor force, dampening wage pressures. The Republican aim to curb illegal immigration and mount the largest deportation operation in American history could prove inflationary. While it might alleviate pressures on areas like housing, where insufficient supply has pushed up costs, severe restrictions on immigration could be disruptive in the short term. Zandi warns that such policies could add to costs and prices and potentially cause shortages in sectors like agriculture, construction, manufacturing, and transportation, where the labor market is already tight. Dollar policy, the currency conundrum. The appreciation of the dollar against other currencies in recent years, driven by Fed rate hikes, has helped ease inflation by lowering the cost of imports. Conversely, a drop in the dollar would add to price pressures. Trump has expressed concern about the dollar being high against the Chinese and Japanese currencies, putting the U.S. in a very bad position. While he hasn't specifically called for a cheaper dollar, his running mate, J.D. Vance, has openly advocated for a weaker greenback to make American exports cheaper. Energy policy, fossil fuels, and inflation. Trump attributes inflation to energy costs and proposes lowering them by embracing further exploitation of U.S. fossil fuel resources. He suggests that this would allow the Fed to lower interest rates. However, Fed policymakers target core inflation gauges, which strip out energy and food costs, and most recent inflation has come from services, not energy. Fed independence. Playing with fire. During his first term, Trump regularly pressured Fed Chair Jerome Powell to ease monetary policy and even discussed seeking ways to remove him. This has stoked concerns about potential threats to Fed independence in a second term. Research shows that countries that shelter their central banks from political interference experience lower inflation. Trump has stated that he would let Powell serve out his chairmanship, which runs to 2026, especially if I thought he was doing the right thing. However, as Coronado warns, you're playing with fire if you start eroding the independence of the central bank. She adds that the risk is global, noting that to mess with that, particularly for the world's reserve currency, is extraordinarily dangerous. As the Republican economic platform takes shape, it's crucial for both ordinary viewers who have long been concerned about financial development and professionals engaged in finance-related work to understand the potential inflationary risks it poses. The irony of the Republican rhetoric on inflation becomes apparent when examining the potential impacts of their proposed policies on tax cuts, tariffs, immigration, the dollar, energy, and Fed independence. While the ability to implement these policies depends on the composition of Congress and the response of financial markets, the Republican platform raises valid concerns about its potential to stoke inflation rather than tame it. As the Federal Reserve prepares for monetary easing, the uncertainty surrounding a potential shift in policy looms large. Investors, economists, and the public at large must remain vigilant and informed about the complex interplay between political promises and economic realities. The stakes are high, and the consequences of misguided policies could be felt not just in the United States but globally, given the dollar's status as the world's reserve currency. In the coming months and years, as the political landscape evolves and policy debates intensify, it will be crucial to critically examine the rhetoric and proposals of all parties, weighing their potential impacts on inflation, growth, and the overall health of the economy. Only through informed discourse and a commitment to sound economic principles can we navigate the challenges ahead and ensure a stable and prosperous future for all. As the Republican National Convention concludes and the campaign trail heats up, the economic platform put forth by the Republicans will undoubtedly be a central point of contention and analysis. The promise to end inflation and make America affordable again resonates with voters, but the means to achieve those goals must be carefully scrutinized. The potential inflationary risks posed by tax cuts, tariff hikes, immigration curbs, and a weakening dollar cannot be ignored. The independence of the Federal Reserve, a critical safeguard against politically motivated monetary policy, must be fiercely protected. As we move forward, it is the responsibility of every citizen, from the ordinary viewer to the financial professional, to engage in the economic discourse, demand transparency and accountability from our leaders, and advocate for policies that prioritize long-term stability and prosperity over short-term political gains. The road ahead may be uncertain, but by arming ourselves with knowledge, engaging in constructive dialogue, and holding our leaders to account, we can navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead. The silent thief of inflation may be a formidable foe, but with vigilance, wisdom, and a commitment to sound economic principles, we can build a future where affordability and prosperity are not just campaign promises, but enduring realities for all Americans.